right? So there's all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff. Anyway, so let's. How far did you get with your Russian?
Once upon a time, I was pretty fluent.
Yeah,
I lived there.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting.
Um, so depending on the accent of who's speak,
We're live, by the way.
one moment,
I don't have my headphones on yet. It depends on
and
the
my key.
accent.
Yeah. So I was living in a mountain village where an observatory is,
Yeah.
and so I got really good at understanding people who spoke with a mix of Ukrainian and Karachay accents.
Right. So there's like the I don't know, like the London accent, the posh London accent of Russian
Right.
accents. There's the one that you're most trained to be able to understand. It's funny.
And I actually, because of where I was living, got most trained to understand what is kind of the equivalent of like rural Ohio.
Is what
Close, but not the same.
Yeah, yeah. And so even now, like if you listen to somebody speaking Russian or like listening to Russian television, does your brain trigger on all of the sounds and go, "Oh, that person just mentioned rocket. That person just
Yes,
mentioned
yes.
economy." Yeah.
And depending on what they say, I can understand all of it. Like the Russian in the Die Hard movies, I can understand all of that, and the translations aren't accurate. So you don't want to watch Die Hard with me because I will rant at the captioning of
Yeah.
the Russian.
Yeah.
Like the meaning is the same, but it's not an actual translation.
Yeah.
Um,
So the thing
I'm
that's weird to me, I don't know, I've mentioned I'm trying to learn Chinese and
uh-huh.
and so Japanese and Chinese use the same writing system. So
Yes.
the Japanese essentially borrowed or stole the Chinese writing system. And so weirdly, as I'm learning characters in Chinese, I'm starting to learn how to read Japanese because I'm learning what the characters. But I couldn't. They pronounce
Right.
them completely differently, right?
Oh yeah.
But I can see that something is a restaurant or in like anime or something like that, right? Like I'm watching anime
Right.
and there's like a sign in Japan, and I'm like, wait a minute, I can read that now. It's
So what gets me is Polish and Russian are extremely close,
yeah,
and movie Polish is often completely understandable.
yeah,
So, like when I first watched Schindler's List, I was deeply confused because I was like, why are they all speaking Russian?
yeah.
And they weren't. They were speaking Polish,
That's
but my
funny.
ears couldn't hear the accent different, and the accents are close enough
Yeah,
that
yeah,
so I can now babble incoherently and get my point across in
yeah,
Russian. But when I was younger, I could like read and write
yeah.
and all of that at like the elementary school level.
So my long-term goal is I want to interview someone from the Chinese Space Agency about their missions. That's the plan.
All right.
Is for me to be able to carry on interviews and conversations with people in the Chinese Space Agency. But I figure that's a couple of years away, right? But I think it's sort of like a fun. It's just, I mean, 1.4 billion people speak this language. Why not, take a crack at it? And it's
Yeah.
very good for the brain. So but it is just, it also, here's the part that's kind of interesting. It feels like you're learning alienese because
Now,
you,
isn't Chinese a tonal language though?
yeah, yeah, no, it's in every part of it is completely different from English, right? The way you pronounce the words, you say the word, you could call a person, you could say, your mother, or you'd say your horse, and it's like totally like the two words are spelled the same, but they just have a slightly different tone that in our local language, in English, we would barely recognize, and yet it's very key to get them right. So, and the
These
writing
are not
system is
words
different.
that should be the same.
No, I know, and the writing system is different too. So it's so funny to see just how they write, and so like I have a language partner. She's Chinese, and
Yeah.
she says, "Oh, it's this word." And there's actually no way for her to communicate exactly what the word is so that I can write it down locally, right? Because there's say 70,000 Chinese characters. Each one is individual. Now there's sure 3,000 common ones, right? And so if she says it's, it's Zhong or it's Ma or whatever, I can't write that down.
They don't have a
There's
phonetic
no
alphabet
phonetic
at all?
spelling. No, they do have this thing called pinyin, which is like a kind of a phonetic version of it. But even that, there are, say, even one. Then they have to say what the tone is. And so let's say like it's QI with third tone, but even that could have 7 meanings. And so it's the weirdest experience to attempt to communicate. And in the end, the way that I have a dictionary on my phone that I have to essentially draw the character until my
Yeah.
phone figures out what the character is that I'm talking about. It's insane. Yeah.
So
So
I'm
there, Thomas
having
Tranneker, you wrote month, month, uh, the can, and then the first part of a Chinese character that means to feel. So as you guys are writing in Japanese, so again, they have totally different uses. Anyway, it's a fascinating process. I highly recommend learning another language. And I now kind of feel like I wish I hadn't given up on my Spanish and given up on my French. So maybe I will take another crack at it and come back around, like do this for a year and then go back and get my Spanish back up and take another year and get my French back up. So it's fun.
now the thing you just explained to me why when I was in China, all the keyboards I saw were in English.
Yeah, so it's so weird. So someone's asking like, how do you write Chinese characters on your keyboard? And I can do it, right? So here, I'll just do it right now. So people who are watching Twitch, right? So let's see if you can see. See if you can see my. No, you're not going to be able to see it.
And I just made myself shorter. Sorry about that. My
So
foot was falling asleep.
so I just wrote ni hao in the keyboard, and essentially what they do is they type in the pinyin. You type in essentially there's an English pronunciation of every Chinese character, and so you type in. So if ni hao means hello, you type in ni on your English keyboard, and then it guesses that you're meaning to say the word ni, and then you type HAO, and then it goes, oh, you probably mean how, and so that shows you the two characters, and then you accept it, and then it gets turned into it. And so when Chinese
It's
people,
like using an emoticon
yeah, and so when people are
keyboard.
typing in their Chinese on their phones, they're typing on English characters. They're typing, A through Z to be able to communicate these different characters. It's such a bizarre experience, and it is it's funny because a lot of the Chinese have lost their ability to actually write their language by hand. And so if you say to a person, you show a person toothpaste and you say, write this down, write the word for toothpaste, a huge percentage can't do it.
Oh man.
Yeah, because someone's mentioning in the chat that it sounds like code completion. Yeah, their brain, they've become so reliant on the technology, and because the underlying method of what the language is so complicated, so many
Yeah.
different characters that a lot of them have lost the ability to write this. So it's a very weird thing talking to people in China about this situation. It's very fascinating. So anyway, I'll keep you all posted. I'll let you know when I do my interview in about 5 years from now, because it is again an incredibly complicated process. But I find it fascinating. I mean, it is the closest you can get to speaking an alien language. When you think about the arrival and how she's attempting to understand this language that is different on every single way.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the same process. So
Well, it's the tonality of it. I don't necessarily hear the tonalities of language. It's something that like in eighth grade when they were sending all the other honors kids to foreign languages, they were like, you, maybe not a good idea.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's because I don't hear what syllable is supposed to have the stress on it, and there's a certain member of our audience who is much beloved, whose name I have mispronounced for years. Um, and it's just a struggle. And that's one of those languages where I'd be calling everyone a lion or a mama or whatever. Just, it would be
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah. I forgot to say hello to people, so let's go. Hello to Andy Cowley, Ben Kalo, Dustin Haskin, Eric Schneider, Esther Gagne, Gudrun Stadbauer, Harry M, Maeve the Brave, Mitzvah Golem, Nancy Graziano, Oli's dad, Rich Wilson, Arjone, Roman Geber, Side MT, Thomas Tranker, Watermelon Felon. And of course, I missed all of the people who said hello earlier, and I apologize. Hello to everybody on Twitch. Awesome to have you joining us as well. I hope you enjoyed that completely different conversation. For those of you wondering what it is that you have stumbled into, this is not about learning languages. This is about us recording an episode of Astronomy Cast. We will record the episode and then we'll stick around and answer your questions about space and or astronomy. Are you ready to go, Pamela?
I am, but I am going to ask you to check what mic you're using to communicate to me because you sound kind of like a robot.
Beep boop. So is this my microphone?
I think so.
No?
Maybe not.
Okay,
No.
hold on. Now, it might be different from what the people who are... No, it says that's the microphone. So here's my webcam. Now I'm talking to you on my webcam.
Oh, wow, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, so this is my microphone.
Okay, so Zoom is just in compression land.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
This is why we each record locally on our own computers.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right, let me know when you're ready.
I am ready. I am recording.
All right, I am also ready. Here we go. Astronomy Cast, episode 568, In Situ Resource Utilization. Welcome to Astronomy Cast, our weekly facts-based journey through the cosmos where we help you understand not only what we know, but how we know what we know. I'm Fraser Cain, publisher of Universe Today. With me, as always, Dr. Pamela Gay, a senior scientist for the Planetary Science Institute and the director of CosmoQuest. Hey, Pamela, how you doing? I'm
doing well. How are you doing, Fraser?
Good. We sound particularly cheery for the apocalypse.
It's a Friday. I'm going to go in the yard and burn things later today.
Yeah, we've definitely moved from the existential crisis, the deep grief phase of this process to we've moved to the marathon portion where we are settling in for what is probably going to be months, if not maybe years of on and off again restrictions, lockdowns, and quarantines. And although it is still terrible out there, and please, everybody, we, through this collective sacrifice, have made a dent in many countries on the spread of this disease. Now we have to lock it in.
Keep it up.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
Yeah, we have to lock this in. We have to lower the rate that it is transmitting to other people to below 1 and wipe it out of existence.
Yeah. And New Zealand's already succeeded. So this is possible. It requires a massive combination of testing and quarantine and tracking down contacts. But that little island nation or 2-island nation proved it is possible.
Yep.
Now, a lot of places out there are lifting their shelter-in-place warnings. Well, you're about to be in trouble in 3 weeks, and we're very sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So even if the shelter-in-place has been lifted, keep an eye on the spread. Remember how it was spreading back in the beginning, and just think about that as well. And it's sort of like the responsibilities on each one of us to ensure the safety of everybody around us. So take those with a grain of salt. The key to surviving in space will be learning how to live off the land. Instead of carrying all your fuel, water, and other resources from Earth, extract them locally at your destination. It's called In Situ Resource Utilization, and if we could figure this out, it'll change everything. All right, Pamela. Um, we should do a bit of a history lesson here when we talk about how essentially we couldn't have done exploration here on Earth without in situ resource utilization. It's the key.
Exactly. Yes. And it has actually reshaped our world nowhere more so than the island of Iceland. It turns out that sailing ships require masts, and masts like to break. And way back when, the great explorers of the Northern Oceans, the Vikings, came across this place with amazing forests and tall, strong trees, and they settled in and took the masts they needed and carried on with their massive trade. We always highlight the pillaging that occurred, but it turned out these were also traders,
Hmm.
hunters, gatherers, and well, Iceland was once a greatly forested land, and now it has almost no forests, and it's leading to vast amounts of erosion.
Yeah.
So be careful what you take.
Yeah, it's
But
interesting. I mean, when you're there in Iceland, there are no trees.
right,
There's
that's because of
there
the Vikings.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's the occasional tree, like a person might have a tree in their, um, in their yard. But apart from that, and apparently there are some efforts to attempt to reforest the island. And in theory, give it another couple hundred years and there will be forests on Iceland
Yeah.
again. But clearly they found what they needed. They were able to survive by cutting down all those trees. Thanks. So maybe that's not necessarily the how we want this lesson to work out. But the point is that they were able to. Oh, sorry. I got to. I got a phone call from my. Okay. Um, let's start this again. So apparently, I mean, this is not the lesson that we want to learn, but the point being that the only way they were able to survive was the fact that there were resources that they could use, trees they could cut down, animals they could hunt, fish they could eat, places they could grow things. They were able to survive in what is a very hostile place.
Yes. And this is how we have systematically explored our world. Again, another amazing example of the past is the Polynesians. They knew exactly where all the little islands dotting the South Pacific were located and had amazing celestial navigation skills and knew if they went from here to here, there would be fresh water when they got to the next place. There would be food, there would be the things necessary to carry on their carrying on as they moved throughout massive areas of the ocean.
And so when we look at the history of space exploration plans, when you look at, say, the moon missions, they carried everything. Every calorie that the astronauts would need was carried up from the surface of the Earth. Every drop of water, every molecule of oxygen that they were going to breathe, everything had to be
Yeah.
carried completely from Earth and then all the way back from the moon. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, people were planning missions to Mars that would be the same thing. Carry everything to Mars and then carry it to be able to survive on the surface of Mars and carry out a mission. And
It's not
the
feasible.
math just kept breaking.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting to me just what is considered in situ resource utilization. Basically, if you don't have to take something with you, that means you are utilizing it where you go. And if you don't have to carry all of your own energy with you, so say you have solar panels,
Yeah.
those solar panels count as an in situ resource utilization. And it's something that doesn't work everywhere in the solar system because we have places, the outer solar system, for instance, where you really need to have those radiothermal generators, those nuclear fuel cells. Whereas on Mars, unless you're Curiosity, they just solar power away, and that's a form of in situ resource utilization. The sun is in situ.
Right, right. And so, but I mean, it's more than you talk about the power. Yeah, let's say you don't have to
Yeah,
carry your gasoline to Mars, although that's not
right.
the right exact example. But say you don't have to carry your hydrogen, liquid oxygen. you don't have to carry the fuel to carry the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. And so
Exactly.
there is this huge multiplier for every kilogram that you're trying to carry to the surface of Mars, many kilograms of
Yeah.
fuel, of propellant to get you there.
And we first started seeing people think hard about how do we separate the resources we need from the rocks of other worlds in the 1960s. And this started to crop up in novels like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which, if you haven't read, is something that is absolutely required reading in modern times. And in that novel, they were shipping grain seeds from Earth up to the moon, utilizing human byproducts and water that was found in the regolith of the moon to grow vast crops that were then shipped back to Earth, which was actually effectively shipping the water from the moon down to Earth.
Right. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. I mean, I think that is probably infeasible. Like there will never be
Yeah,
a time when it will make economic sense to grow things on the moon and then ship them back to Earth. But growing things on the moon to feed the people on the moon, that makes a mountain of sense. And
exactly.
I think you could arguably say that space exploration will never be self-sustaining until we have in situ resource utilization.
Exactly. And
For people, let's leave this in. The dog is licking Pamela while she's attempting to record the podcast. Such a professional.
so here we have to figure out, so what do different places have to offer us? And the three big things that folks are constantly trying to figure out is the oxygen water situation. I lump that as one thing because if you have water, you have oxygen. The other thing they're constantly trying to figure out is, well, how do we build ourselves a shelter? Can we find a way to live without having to take our habitats with us? And the third thing that, well, if you want to come back, becomes an issue is, can you make rocket fuel wherever it is that you're going? Because you can't solar panel your way off the surface of a gravitational planet.
So let's break down. You talked about these things here. Let's talk about some of these core resources that we use a ton of. Like it's okay to bring your 3D printer from Earth. It's okay to bring
Yes.
your communication system from Earth. But let's talk about some of the big bulk things. And so the number one thing I think is just going to be propellant, fuel
Yes.
for your ship. So where does this come from, and how could we try to make it? What is
Well,
it?
it
Yeah.
there's so many different kinds of fuel. Here on Earth, we're often looking at liquid oxygen systems. Um, but Elon Musk is actually talking about on Mars creating a what he calls methanolox. This is a fuel system that is made of methane, CH4, and is created through melting of the water ice that can be found in the regolith and the poles of Mars, and mixing it with carbon drawn out of the atmosphere of Mars. Mixing it together in the right ways, and you end up with methane that using hand waviness that he said in the telecon related to this announcement. These are details to discuss offline. He
Yeah.
actually said that.
Right, but
Um,
the process of creating methane out of the atmosphere is well understood. It's been done
yes.
for 100 years. That you take water, break it apart, use the hydrogen, use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, mix them together. Again, details. Look at them
The
offline.
the
It's
bacteria in our gut does this
right. Yeah,
naturally.
I think it's called the Sabatier process. But anyway, the point being that you can do this, no problem, and produce methane. The key, and this was, the big problem always was that they weren't sure if there was going to be accessible water on Mars. If you don't have water, then you don't have the hydrogen to to make the methane with, and so you'd have to
And
bring the hydrogen. But now we know the water is there.
and accessible remains the key word.
Yes.
One of the issues that has led to no ending stream of crank emails is engineers who believe they have found the most efficient way to somehow strip lunar rock of its water. The minerals of the moon, many of the minerals on Mars, have H2O locked into the lattices, the matrices of the rocks. And if you tear apart the molecules in the minerals, you can liberate water. This was particularly visible when L-Cross bombarded the moon back in 2009 and sent that plume of material up above the surface, allowing us to sample and study exactly what is the mineralogy of the moon made of.
Right.
But getting that water out is a highly energetic process. And if you're already strapped for energy, it doesn't help if you have to use massive amounts of energy to get the water out, to use the water to make methane, to make your rocket fuel. That's just kind of not a useful process.
Mm-hmm. So, but even just like if you just have water, you split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and that is the fuel system that was in the space shuttle. You've got,
yes,
right? So just if you just have water and energy for the hydrolysis,
yeah,
electrolysis, sorry,
electrolysis,
yeah, then you can break them up and you've got yourself fuel. So there's tons of them. There's other ideas, like, have you seen this idea of like a steam powered rocket?
yeah. I know the gravity is a whole lot less out there,
Yeah.
but
So you take in water. You don't try to break it up into its hydrogen and oxygen, but you then heat it up, superheat the water, and then you can then spray it out of your rocket just as a propellant, as steam.
right.
And it provides a level of thrust, and it requires a simpler, you don't have to be storing cryo cold.
And the way this works is the massive volume change that takes place between water and steam. Water takes up a whole lot less volume than steam does. And so as that escaping expanded now gas form of water flies out the thrusters of your rocket, up and away,
Yeah.
it's just not as efficient as
Right.
other means.
Right. But what it lacks in that, it makes up for in simplicity. You just
That's true.
dump water in,
That's
heat
true.
it up, spray it out. You've got yourself a thruster. So there's many different ways, and I mean, we could do a whole show just about manufacturing propellants,
Yes.
in various in situ, and that accounts for the vast majority. So once that gets cracked, imagine you can refuel, which we talked about last week, just how important that'll be if you're able to refuel. What other resources will we use that we'll be able to find out there in space?
So we have the water that we need water or we die. It's kind of a thing. And then of course there's the oxygen that we need to breathe. And again, if you have water, you have the oxygen we need to breathe and you have rocket fuel. So those all tie together. The other big thing is just the ability to build the stuff that you live in. You take your 3D printer, but you need stuff to feed the 3D printer. And there's some really cool research that has gone into trying to figure out how to use lunar dust to build stuff. And one of my favorite breakthroughs that I'm sure I've brought up dozens of times at this point here on Astronomy Cast is some researchers in Tennessee a number of years ago figured out that if you hit lunar regolith with just the right wavelength of microwave radiation, it gets melty and will solidify.
Yeah.
So you can take all this dust and essentially, if you've ever seen a street cleaner with all of the little swirly bits on the bottom, replace those with microwave transmitters. roll along and just create your road behind you.
That's really cool. Yeah,
It's amazing.
there's a great photograph that someone did. I think it was from the European Space Agency. They had a pile of simulated lunar regolith, so
Hmm.
lunar soil that
Yeah.
they had processed. I think they had heated it up and had boiled away certain parts of gotten rid of the oxygen out of the stuff. Because when you look at this stuff, it's actually like iron oxide or
Yeah.
magnesium oxide or aluminum oxide. Like it's all, or silicon oxide. Like it's essentially these various minerals bound up with oxygen. You want the oxygen, but you're left over. And so they showed you, because the oxygen is a lot less dense than these metals, you bake one of these piles of lunar regolith, and you end up with a pile of metal, right? That you can then use to feed into your 3D printer. And we have 3D printers now that will print
Yes.
metal, that will print titanium, that will print iron, that will print aluminum, no problem. So you can imagine, just you take lunar regolith, dump it into your 3D printer, and you just print girders on the moon to
Well,
construct your
it can be
spacecraft.
it can be even better than that. So one of my quiet little fantasies is I've been keeping an eye on 3D printed houses. Uh, and these are often these gorgeous arcing structures that you can't really make any other way because you set your 3D printing machine in the center and it has an arm on a pivot that can go out to different distances. So everything that you do is some sort of an ellipse or an arc with a maximum radius that is whatever the length that arm can be. And they can be in the center with all of their extruder material and then build around, building up these houses that look like they're straight out of a children's book. I don't know if you remember any of those children's books where you had the big round blobby characters that would basically lump mud around them, and then that was how they built their homes.
That's
Well,
funny. No, no, I have no idea
it's
what you're talking about.
okay.
Clearly, we
So
had different
so
childhoods.
it's all right. It's all right. But we can essentially go to the moon and build our little regolith miner. I'm thinking spice miner from Dune here. I read way too
Yeah.
much science fiction,
Or not
and
enough, whatever it
or not
is. Yeah.
enough, and plop it down and have it digging up stuff from the center, processing it processing it through like a reverse collimation tower, extruding it out the arm, and then just building these arcing facilities all around out of nice, thick, blocking radiation regolith. And this might be the one way that we can readily build things with thick enough walls to keep us safe.
That's really cool. So we've got our propulsion, our breathing, our liquid. We've got the building materials to build our homes, to build potentially things that we may want out of metal.
Yeah.
What about eating? Because again, we have to
Yeah.
carry all of this food from Earth. So can we do that locally?
This you have to carry your own seeds. That just flat out, there's nothing already there.
Yeah.
There are certain lichens that it's thought might be able to grow in the wilds of Mars the way Mars is today. But that's not a good diet.
No, no. Unless you're a
Uh
reindeer.
yeah, even then, I'm not sure it would grow enough that that would be a good diet. So you're really looking at asking instead, is there anything that can be done to the existing soils to make it so that you can use the soils to grow plants? With the moon, we have this problem that moon rock is so sharp, it will shred up seed in this case. It's unweathered crushed glass.
Right, right. But
So you're not growing things on the moon.
well, you could throw it in the equivalent of a tumbler, a rock tumbler.
Yeah, that takes a whole lot of energy.
Hmm.
So I foresee more a several generations of composting going on.
Right.
And once you do enough composting, you're probably okay. But with Mars, it looks like Mars had this amazing liquid past with oceans that would have tumbled down a lot of the sands on Mars to make them not as sharp and awful.
Right.
And so here, what we see is soil that, first of all, has perchlorates in it that will kill anything.
Right.
So you need to
Wash it.
get rid of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, wash it. Get rid of the perchlorates. And then you just need to add in the nutrients. And what is fascinating to me is we don't even know how much nutrient we need to add in because we keep getting more and more evidence that there's already organics in the soils on Mars. And so the question becomes, once you get rid of the perchlorates, which is one heck of a problem, how bad is it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that it's like trying to grow things in dirt found in Death Valley, which is really just gross sand.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like trying to grow something here where I'm in the Midwest, where you sneeze and your sneeze is now sprouting things you don't want to think about. Um, our front yard already has knee-high weeds 3 weeks later.
Yeah, same here.
Uh, but there is the potential that we can use the soil without huge amounts of
Right.
modification. We don't have to tumble it the way we do
Right.
with the moon. It's just cool.
But even if we don't use necessarily the local regolith, I mean, NASA has gotten really good at hydroponics and
Yes.
aquaponics. So you can grow your material in a medium. You can grow it just in water with lots of additional nutrients added to it. So that technology has actually been very well worked out. And I guess when you think about it, it's back to your very original point at the beginning, which is that it's really just sunlight, that you're just turning
Yes.
sunlight into human mass, right?
Yeah. And there are limits to hydroponics. You can't grow an apple tree hydroponically because its root system won't have anything to grip onto. But,
I'm now going to Google
um,
for a hydroponic apple tree right now.
oh, jeez. Um, so if you can figure out how to create a diet that isn't just nutritionally satisfying, but is also satisfying to the soul. I mean, we call food soul food for a reason, comfort food. If you can figure out that combination of things, um, I hope to someday see domed cities on Mars that have perhaps only in the occasional column of soil those trees that
Yeah.
we're trained to see growing. And sure, get the rest of your food through hydroponics.
Yeah.
But we need those trees.
I mean, there was an interesting study that came out. Some people were looking at what it might take, and they saw like essentially tunnels underneath the surface of Mars, where
Yeah.
you have these tunnels go for kilometers, and they would be filled with people growing. They'd be filled with plants that are growing hydroponically because that keeps them safe from the radiation. You can control the environment, and I forget the exact amount, but you need some set amount of square meterage per human being to feed them, and it's a lot, but it's not a ludicrous amount. So let's just sort of we've already knocked off the vast majority of the
Yeah.
mass that we need to carry. If we're going to try and survive on a place like the moon or Mars, and we're able to handle all of these things, we've got most of what we need, but we're not full, true self-sufficiency yet. We're still going to rely on stuff from Earth. So what
Right.
remains, and what maybe can we do to solve those last problems?
Well, we don't have mining capacity on other worlds. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to rely on technology to live in other environments. And this means you need rare earth elements, which I guess rare Mars, rare moon elements. We need rare elements. We need the copper for this, the silicon for that, that is of the premium grades.
Right.
So this is where you need to send all those base metals, whether whatever form you can, as well as the fabrication equipment. But the key is you don't have to send everything already fabricated as we move into better and better printing,
Hmm.
CDC, what is it? uh, CNC machines. Um, we need the ability to build things up and cut them down.
Yeah.
If you have those two machines and you have the base materials, then you can manufacture everything you need. So you can almost imagine, um, hopefully someday, having our little robot miners out there tearing through the asteroids to find what's needed.
Yeah, you can kind of, but you can
And
imagine, say, you need a bulldozer on Mars, and
right,
so you send the bulldozer, the key components that can only be manufactured on Earth, and then the rest is instructions for the Martian 3D printers. And so
exactly.
they take the central processing unit and some of the key hydraulics or whatever it is, and then they print out all of the treads and the bucket and all that kind of stuff out of local resources, and then they build these things. And so you can imagine getting a tiny little care package that is a bulldozer that you then have
Well,
to spool up your 3D printer and build the rest of it.
and and this is going to usher in a day where we have to think completely differently about manufacturing, even here on Earth. And we're starting to see hints of what this will look like. We have a glow forge here in our house. We don't have a 3D printer yet because I've seen the carnage a 3D printer can wreck. I'm only adult enough right now for a glow forge.
We owned one and we sold it because it was just
Y-
too complicated and too much of a
right.
mess. So yeah,
I
yeah,
I'm not detail oriented enough.
yeah.
But there's a day in our future that is coming where already with our Glowforge, we can look up patterns for things and we'll spend $5 for the pattern or just innovate something on ourselves. I'm using a teleprompter to record the daily space that was cut entirely out of acrylic on our Glowforge and just slotted together beautifully.
That's
And
amazing.
it's a $200 teleprompter made with $20 of acrylic.
And a multi-$100 glow forge.
We're not going to talk about how expensive the Glowforge was,
Right.
but we use it for so many Amazon boxes now actually occasionally have purposes where we make stuff
Oh, that's
out of
cool.
them.
You slice them up.
And and things that I would normally have been purchasing before, like the cardboard that I use to pad my paintings when I mail them out, instead of buying the cardboard cake rounds that I was buying before, I'm just taking the best cardboard shipping boxes I have that have nice shiny on the inside, cutting those up.
Yeah.
And that so copyright starts to change when you're buying the patterns instead of buying the
Right.
thing.
But you can definitely imagine this future where almost everything can be
Yeah.
manufactured remotely, and you're down to just a few key components that does require a chip fabrication lab to actually build. And then we will be very close to a lot of these places being completely self-sufficient. It's amazing to think about that future.
And one of the great people who's thought about it is Cory Doctorow. And all of you out there, if you haven't read his books, his short story Print Crime is one of my favorite short stories, and it's only about 2 pages long, so it's a really
Yeah.
short story. Check out his books and start to get insights on the real world near future potential of these devices.
Yeah, and if you think this stuff is science fiction, I mean, it mostly is. But the Perseverance rover is going to have an experiment on board that is designed to see if it can produce fuel on the surface of Mars out of atmospheric oxygen. So stay tuned.
Yeah,
Pamela, do you have some names for us this week?
I do. As always, we are here thanks to the generous contributions of people like you. And I just want to say, I know a lot of you are struggling right now. I see it in the donation levels that have dropped. I see it in the people who've disappeared after years. We're here for you. You come first. Yes, we do take your donations and turn them into pay for people who turns it into food for people. We're going to get by no matter what. We're here for you. And those of you who are still contributing, oh my goodness, we are so grateful. And I'm just going to read some of your names. So thank you to Kshartan Sferi, who someday, please, please, please tell me the pronunciation of your name. Um, to Sinai, to Stephen Shewater, to Bill Hamilton, to Joshua Pearson, to Frank Trippin, to Richard Riviera, to Alexis, to Thomas Stepstrop, to Sylvan Westby, to Jeff Collins, to Arctic Fox, to Brian P. Cox, to Merrick Giordani, to Nate Detweiler, to Brian Gregory, to Ron Thorson, to Philip Walker, to Matt Rucker, to Dave Lackey, to Kevin Nitka, to Cooper, and to Chris Schauerhofer. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week, Pamela.
See you later. Now, don't go anywhere. We're just saving because this is what we do.
Yes. So what did I say? 568?
568.
Okay, I'll upload in a second. Okay, got a couple of questions here that came up.
Okay.
Ollie's dad asked, why would we want to inhabit the moon?
As a stepping off point, and it's also a good place to store stuff. So it would be a good place to have seed archives. It would be a good place to move like Library of Congress type stuff. It's always good to have a place to store shit that can't be destroyed by an earthquake or a flood. So other than science, it's also a good storage place. So think of it more as like McMurdo Station. You don't really want to live at McMurdo Station.
Yeah, that's the same analogy that I would use. Is like, why would you want to inhabit Antarctica? For all kinds of reasons. You definitely wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to live there as your permanent home, probably. Right. You might think you do, but when you get there, but you don't. You know, like it'd be fun to visit. Like I'd love to go and visit Antarctica. I would not want to live there. And so for science reasons, for all kinds of reasons, but and we will figure that out, and the lunar base will grow as big as it needs to be based on those requirements.
And tourism, you know, there's going to be tourism there.
Oh yeah. I would absolutely love to go to the moon for a week and jump around on the moon and just experience, look out the window and look back and see the Earth. And then I would like to come home, please.
Film studios.
Yeah.
And don't go there to raise your kids. That's mean.
Yeah. And then of course, just the fact that it is energetically, once you've reached the moon, you've gotten most of the way out of the Earth's gravity well. And so you can refuel at the moon and then go to all kinds of places. Arjun is asking, are there any old ancient technologies that could be helpful in Moon-Mars colonization?
Not that I know of, but that doesn't mean there aren't. It just means I don't know of them.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that it's mostly going to require, like, here on Earth, even when you travel, you breathe the air, you can drink the water, you can eat, you can step offshore on some island that you've never seen, and there's a weird crab, and you can just eat it and feel pretty safe that you're probably going to. But every single thing that your body needs to do out in space is going to require some technology. So you are going to be so dependent on technology, it baffles the imagination at all times.
Yeah, this is true.
Yep. Jason Lord, is glass sufficient for shielding from cosmic solar radiation on the moon, or is something else needed?
It depends on the composition of the glass and the thickness of the glass. So things like alpha particles, which are just high energy helium cores, that's sufficient to block glass is sufficient to block alpha particles. Other kinds of particles are like glass. Who cares? Watch me go through that. Um, so it all depends on what you're trying to
Yeah.
block, what is the composition, and how thick is it.
But at the end of the day, when you're dealing with radiation, more protons, more better. So the more protons you
Oh,
have in
more,
between you
yes, more,
and the radiation,
yes.
the
Now I'm
better.
with you.
Yeah. And so
So the thicker the material
yeah,
between you and it.
yeah, the more protons you can put in between you and space, the better. Water
Yes.
does a great job. You surround yourself in 1 meter thick of water, and
Hmm.
you're pretty much safe from any amount of space radiation.
Yes.
And water is at least transparent-ish. So, it's not glass, but you sandwich water ice in between some glass, and you've got yourself a nice effective radiation shield.
Or what I love is the artistic renditions where you essentially build either a spaceship or a habitat where you have a fish tank that is the dome around you, and you just have fish which are processing all of your wastewater,
Right.
generating fertilizer. It turns out tilapia, which were thought to be the holy grail, they are just not as good in space as we had hoped.
Right.
But this is still something that we're exploring.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's shrimp. Right.
So over on Twitch, Guppy Shark ADL quotes Aquaman in space.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Watermelon Felon asks, would plants grown on the surface of the moon or Mars be safe to eat, or would they contain radiation?
So as far as we've been able to tell, they're fine to eat.
Yeah. So the radiation that you suffer from being in space is essentially direct. So
Right.
you will take the hit because you're being shot at by little bullets that are coming from supernova that were a million light years away. And that's how you take that damage. But it doesn't build up in anything. And so even
And
if you use water to surround yourself with, and the water is getting bombarded with radiation, you could drink it and it would be fine.
and one of the things that I hate about the language of science is the way we abuse the word radiation. Radiation can refer to the electromagnetic spectrum, all the colors of the rainbow from gamma ray out to the longest radio waves with
Yep.
visible light in the middle. It can also refer to uh, nuclear decaying particles like uranium and stuff like that. And so right now there's horrible, horrible forest fires out in the area of the Ukraine near Chernobyl that are releasing swaths of radiation.
Right.
And in this case, by radiation, we mean particles undergoing nuclear decays and releasing
Right.
dangerous energy in the process.
Right. And so you've got these little particles that are like those little supernova, but you're
Yeah.
putting them close to your body or you're breathing them into your lungs. And they're continuously spewing out these dangerous particles inside your body.
And so in this case, you have whatever kind of particle it is undergoing a decay, releasing something like an alpha particle, that
Right.
high energy helium core. And when that hits your DNA is like, I'm out,
Right.
and you get cancer and die.
Yeah. And so it's like you can't catch radiation and then spread it. Right? So it's not like if you have water and the water is getting irradiated, then the water is then going to become radioactive.
Right.
Right?
So the face I made is because there have been incidents where people have spilled radioactive material, walked through it, spread it all over the
Oh,
United States.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you can spread radioactive material, you
Right.
can't spread radiation.
Right. So if plutonium like
Don't
like
get it on your feet,
like if
people. Do not
decaying
get it on your feet.
yeah, if you're close to decaying plutonium and you get irradiated, it can kill you. But if
Mhm.
you have now been heavily dosed by plutonium
Radiation poisoning is not contagious.
right, radiation poisoning is not contagious. So you now then go to the hospital. You're not going to get other people in the hospital sick from your radiation poisoning. However, as we saw in Chernobyl, if you are covered in the dust of decaying plutonium, then you can make people sick, because it's actually these individual little particles that are all over you that are continuing to give off these little bullets.
And one of the horrendous ways that it's believed that the Russians have killed off various dissidents is by injecting them with polonium. And because they have the radioactive material in them, they are a source of high energy
Yes.
particles. And so it's not that the radiation is contagious, it's that they are radioactively hot
Right.
themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, yeah, that that if you, this has been the plot of various shows, that if you
Yeah.
accidentally ingest some polonium, you're done for, because it's in you. It's part of you.
Yeah.
Your body is
Yeah.
using it.
And that along with burning are like the two worst ways to die.
Ugh.
We went someplace very
Yeah,
dark.
we really did. Anyway,
We need to go
our
back to fish aquariums
yeah,
and
fish
living inside of
aquariums
a
and
fish
little
aquarium.
shrimp where
We
you
could 3D print it, 3D print extra thick layers of acrylic,
yeah,
one giant shield, another giant shield,
yeah,
seal off the bottoms and have a portal.
yeah.
I don't know how you fill it from the top.
From
You
the
have
top.
to fill it
Yeah.
from the top.
But I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, which is that because of just the way the word radiation is used,
Yeah.
there are too many misconceptions that go along
Yeah.
with it. And people try to break it up. They say ionizing radiation, etc. But
Not
still,
helping.
it's not far enough. We need literally entirely new words.
Yeah.
So get on that, science. Arjone says, could plants be genetically trained to exist in a Mars environment while on Earth, like how
Yes.
farmers grow plants for certain qualities normally?
Yes. Yes.
To a certain extent.
Well, this is how we actually know that you can have lichen on Mars.
Yeah.
There were some really cool experiments back in the days leading up to Viking, where they were trying to figure out what could grow in these environments, and you just pump a vacuum, fill it with the right stuff, and
Yeah.
see what will grow.
Yeah. I mean, the only difference you've got is maybe the different gravity, but we've seen that plants can grow.
Moisture.
And but even that, no. I mean, like if you take lichen and you put it on the surface of Mars, it will continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do anything else. It's ready to go. That and cyanobacteria. There's actually there's a couple of other critters that can survive on the surface of Mars, and then there's a whole bunch of them that can survive, like that can hibernate on Mars, and then you bring it back inside, and then it flourishes again, so it won't be killed.
This is where there's that one scientist whose name I can't remember, who was PI of one of the Viking instruments to search for life, and he's like, expletive, expletive, expletive. There was life. Our evidence showed it. We got silenced. Please accept my results.
Yes.
And
more evidence necessary.
Yeah. He's quite determined that they saw lichen already existing on Mars.
The problem is that it wasn't a good enough test to be able to absolutely confirm it. So more.
Yeah.
So, but Perseverance is on its way. So hang tough. There's more coming, and there's going to be Mars sample return missions coming after that. So we will get to the bottom of that question.
Although we don't know how to get the samples back, we just know how to collect them.
We've pretty much reached the end of our hour. So what is going on? What's your schedule now with all of the various live streams and stuff that you're doing? When will you be on next?
I will be on next for certain on Sunday evening. I'm probably going to start earlier than I have been. I'm hoping to start around 8 p.m. Central. That's 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/Starstrider. And I'm going to be working on some space art. And if we can get it worked out, I'm going to be collaborating with David Joseph Wesley, who will be creating out of this world music while I create solar systems out of paints and Photoshop.
Fantastic.
We're just going to see what we can create. And beyond that, daily space every day at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. That's 6 p.m. London time. bringing you a quick rundown of what's new in space and astronomy. Go over to Universe Today to get the long stuff. We have the quick bites for you.
Sounds good. I've got a no guest scheduled for my next open space on Monday, so I think I'll just do a live QA on that day. And then the week after that, I've got Moya McTeer, who's one of our co-hosts on the Weekly Space Hangout, is going to be joining me and talking about her work with the Columbia Cool World Lab. So that's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Thank you, everyone watching us. Thanks to the moderators. Thanks to, of course, the producers, our good friends of the Weekly Space Hangout crew, everybody on YouTube, everybody on Twitch, and of course, you, Pamela. Thank you. And we will see
And thank you, Fraser.
all of you next week. 再见.
До свидания.